Much better. Now the only person who sees that is me. Okay. So have to hit it tomorrow. Okay. So yesterday we learned about Hafara versus Hatara, and we had two Mekayos to tell us that there's also Hatara with three Hajjaitais rather than with one Mumcha, because the first approach of the Gemara was a Gzeir Shava. It says Zehadavar at the introduction of the Parsha of Nedarim, and it also says Zehadavar at the introduction of the Parsha of Shchutei Chutz. And we made a Gzeir Shava from one to the next. By Shchutei Chutz, it applies to Kol B'nai Yisrael. So we say that Hatara could also apply to Kol B'nai Yisrael. It says Rosh Amatais. So the Gemara distinguishes and says, if it's one person alone, then it must be Rosh Amatais. But if it's three people, then it could even be regular Yechidim, as long as the Ran says, as long as they understand what's going on. They have to have some level of intelligence. And then we imported that information from Shchutei Chutz. We export the Rosh Amatais to Shchutei Chutz to teach you that you could be shoyal on hektish. If you make something hektish, you could go to a Rav and say, I have Harata, and come on your Pesach, and you can undo the hektish. And if you remember yesterday, we had a little shayla, if you're over in the day with hektish, are you mechuyev to do tshuva, or are you mechuyev to be shoyal, so that you could reverse the aver l'mafreya? And what yes, why shouldn't you? Right? Then we had another approach, according to Beis Shammai, who holds you could not be shoyal on hektish. He doesn't have the Gzeir Shav at all, and he learned that three adjoices are good. You learn it from the fact that the Torah was Soimach, put the parsha of Nedarim right after the parsha of Yom Tov. So the beginning of Matos is Nedarim, and the end of Pinchas is talking about the Yom Tovim. And we learned Elam Hayadei Hashem, Dafke Hayadei Hashem need Musmachim Mumchim to do Kiddush HaChodesh, but Nedarim don't. And once again, we had to come on to saying that even though we have a limit that Nedarim don't need Musmachim, even though it says Rosh Matos, we say if it's one, you need Rosh Matos. You need a Rav. And Duran speaks out, you don't need Mamash HaMusmach, but you need a Rav. And if you have multiple people, then it could even be three adjoiters. So that was the Gemara yesterday. Avigdor asked a question yesterday, because the Gemara at the end of what we looked yesterday talks about if someone was shoisik, so he wasn't outright Mekayim his wife's nether, he was just quiet. But the reason why he was quiet, his intention was not because he wanted to be Mekayim the nether, he really wanted to be made for the nether, but he wanted to first spook his wife because she made that nether. And he wanted her to be afraid that he will not be made for another. Reb Chanina said, in fact, that it's not considered mekuyim, and in fact, he could be made for it even 10 days later. And the Gemara was discussing this. So Victor had a question at the time, is it not dvarim shabalev enim dvarim? The fact that I'm silent is expressing that I'm a kaiman. So the fact that I want to say that it didn't mean that. It's only because I wanted to spook my wife. That's dvarim shabalev. I think that's what the kasha Victor asked was. Okay, so let's keep that in mind. I'm sorry? Right, so that's good. We're going to get a little bit of a clarity about what dvarim shabalev is and what dvarim shabalev isn't because of the Victor's question. So let's see the Gemara. Most of Rava. Which means if he was quiet, it only works if he was quiet if he died that day. But if he was quiet until the next day, now when it says shoisik, it means shoisik for any reason. My lav is shoisik, even though manas l'meked. And you see the mere shoisik al manas l'meked is still considered a kiyum. What was the Mishnah referring to? It was shoisik al manas l'kayim. In fact, if I'm shoisik with the intent, I want to be mekayim the nether, well then it's mekuyim right away. Yachi hainu oisham avekiyim. Ella b'shoisik stam. It means you didn't think about it. You were stam shoisik. There, the chiddush is if you do that until the expiry, you can no longer be mefer. But if you have positive kavanah that I want to be mefer, but I just want to spook her so she shouldn't know about it, there you don't see clearly from this brisa that it would be a hakam. Masav Rav Chisda, there's ways where kiyum is more chomer, and there's ways where hafar is more chomer, and there's more ways, in fact, than even listed in this brisa. But we're going to list some of them. Where do you see a chomer by kiyum? Shashtika mikayemes. By kiyum, you don't have to outright come and say something. By not saying anything, it will be a kiyum. But then shtika mevatelas. But you can never be made for something with shtika. You have to say something, right? Either you can either say tali is shasi, tali achil, like we learned with the kavanah of her, but there has to be some words coming out of your mouth. Kayim beliboy kayim. If you make kiyum in your heart, it would be a kiyum. But havar beliboy ain't a mufer. Kayim ain't la ein yachal haver. Kayim you cannot be made for. Once you're mekayim another, you can't be made for it anymore. Haver, and if you're made for another, ein yachal kayim. And the Ran speaks out. This is not a chumrah, since the Mishnah is listing off the comparison between hafara and kiyum. It mentions a way where they're equal as well. Katani. Let's see what the Mishnah, what the Brisa said. Shastika mikayemes. Being silent is mekayim. It's a very broad term. Any type of shtika is mekayim. My love, b'shoisik almanas l'menket. Let's say it means even if you're shoisik with the intent of being mefer, but you were shoisik, it's still going to be a good kiyum. So you have a raya against Rab Chanina. This brisa is telling me that what type of shtika makes kiyum if that's your intent. Isn't that what the Mishnah says? If you make kiyum in your heart, so that means the shtika almanas l'kayim. So obviously the shtika must include shtika even not almanas l'kayim. Ela b'shoisik stam, like we answered before. Yeah, shtika means I was shoisik, but I didn't have any kavanah, yes or no. But if I had specific kavanah that I want to be made for, from here you don't see that the shtika would be a kiyum. Zokt Gemara ashkan chaymer behekem mi behafer. We found a way where hakama is more stringent than afarid, the ways that we just listed. But behafer mi behakem minolam, where do we find? Where is there a chumrah that exists by a farah and not by a kama? Rabbi Yosy nishalan ala hakim ve'nishalan ala hefer. If you made a kama, you could be shoyel on it, but you can't be shoyel on a farah because a farah you're not creating anything that you could undo. You're just causing that the nether is no longer there. So that was that attack. Rabbi Chanina survived, but there's a very important run on this survival. So let's have a quick look at this run. How far belibo any mufer? Ad sheyoytzi b'svasa. V'nir be'anai zok te'elegram. Yalfinin lam nishtika diyoyim shamai shim b'kayemes. How do we know that hafara beliboy doesn't work? You learn it from yoyim shamai shim b'kayemes. It says if you're silent for the entire day, it's mekayim. Why? Why being silent that day is a kiyum? The time am I? Mishum the kivan sha'avar yoim shmiya v'loy hafar. Since the entire day passed and you weren't made for it, the Torah tells us that that's called akama. How does it work? It's goli adaite to roitze b'kiyum shel neder. So this is not dvarim shabalev. Rather, it's a clear expression when you're not protesting and the day passes by. That proves that your intent is, that an umdana, your das is that you want kiyum. That's a very good point. So we're soon going to see that dvarim shabalev einam dvarim is primarily when they contradict what you're doing. Pigel, your machshava is not contradicting anything. So when you do an amaisa, I said to go over to a woman, say, I read B'Kadesh Shli B'Tabasu Kadesh Moshe Yisrael. But in mind, I had a Tanai Almanas that you run around the block 6 times. But I didn't articulate that. There, my das is a direct contradiction to what I did. So that's where you have a problem. But that's right. That's a different question. That your question is machshava kamaisa. By an affair, we say machshava is not kamaisa. We're talking about if dvarim shabalev is dvarim or not. In other words, if I do something but I have an intent that's not obvious, does that limit the maisa that I make? You're a mitzvah. Oh, so tell you guys that fill us in. Is it discussed this again?
I just remember that there's a difference between
I thought you were going to say, yeah, I missed that shtickle because it was Dvarim Shabalev. That was Dvarim Shabalev. Yeah. Alma, you see from here, Kol Shabaliboy Lekaimoy, you see clearly that if you're, how do you know Kiyum Belev is good? Because you see from the Torah. The Torah says if you're not made for a day, it's a Kiyum. So what did that show you? That Kol Shabaliboy Lekaimoy Yisagi. I don't have to speak out Kiyum as long as I think Kiyum. Ella, the Yoiv Lerachmana, Kol Hahu Yoim Alafar. The Torah gives you all of that day as an opportunity to be mefer. We should add the shimsha until the sun goes down. Loy muchach midi sheyehiroitza lekayim. It doesn't prove. I'm not shaking, by the way. That's just the screen shaking. I'm steady. So you don't have to worry about that. So unless it's my eyes, I see my pointer is like vibrating, and then my pointer is not even on the Gemara anymore. Can you see it up there? But there's fine. Oh, because here it's vibrating. Okay. So Al Makosha believe the Kaimai Sagi, Ella, the Yoivle Rachmana, Kalo Yoim Lafara, why? Jum the Ad Arvashimsha until Shkia. By the way, that is the expiry date of your Afara. When it says till the end of the day, it means till Shkia. Loy Muchach Midi, she writes Alakaim. It's not Muchach. Your intent is not Muchach that you want to be Mekayim until your Shoisik past Harab Shemesh. Why? The Dilma Basar Haki Meferla. Since the Torah tells you have all day to be made for, you don't see that I really want Hakama until I allow that time to expire. The Kivan the Basar Daite bil Chudeas Linon. Since we're only going Basar's Das, he's not expressing Kiyum. Umina, and you see from here, the Chol Shekayim Veliboy Kaim La'alter. So if you have a positive kavanah of Kiyum, that Minasvar should be chal right away. How do I know? Because I know Kiyum Belev works. How do I know Kiyum Belev works? Because the Torah says if you're not Mekayim until the end of the day, we consider that as a positive kavanah. We consider that you can no longer be mefer. So the only reason why you have to wait till the end of the day is because the Torah is giving you that period of time to think that you're going to be mefer. However, if you had a positive, specific kavanah during the day, yes, I want this nether, well, that's a kiyum right away. So if that's the case, we have a raya from the pasuk, from the fact that if you're not Mekayim, if you're not mefer till the end of the day, that's an automatic kiyum. That tells us that kiyum belev works. So if you had a positive kiyum belev, it would work right away. By you having that positive kavanah that I want to be Mekayim, it's the same type of das as you allowing the time to expire. Like we said yesterday. That's if he said nothing at all. So let's see what the Ran is saying. What the Ran is saying is, if you know that not being mefer for 12 hours, not being mefer until the end of the day, if you know that expires your afara, your option to do afara, that is an expression of kiyum. That's what the Ran says, and the Ran wants to take it a step further. If that's an expression of kiyum, even though you didn't articulate anything out of your mouth, merely the fact that your time to make afara expired, if that's the case, so the Ran stretches it and says, oh, but if you have positive kavanah to be mekayim, that should also work, because you see, without articulating something, it could be a kiyum. For Rabbi Akiva Eger, really a vigorous question. I believe Rabbi Akiva Eger is asking a vigorous question, or maybe a Eger is asking Rabbi Akiva Eger's question. But either way, it's pretty good. So Zokt, how could you make such a jump from not being mefer until the expiry? That's considered a hakama, and you want to make a jump and say, if you had positive kavanah in the middle of the day, that would also be hakama. Kashali, Rabbi Akiva Eger. Hakaim along, the after dvarim shabalev loy havu dvarim, we have a rule. Dvarim shabalev loy havu dvarim. Mikol makim, there's an exception to it. Heicha de muchach v'goli lekoil. They didn't have a dvarim. In a case where it's so obvious from this situation that this is what you're thinking, that's not called dvarim shabalev. So by not being mefer until the end of the day, that's screaming to the world, I want this nether. That's dvarim shabalev lahav dvarim. Ki ahi de mavrachas uchadoima. Im kein frek the gili nashas ma raya de b'shasik kol yom hashmiyah. How could you be right from the fact that if you were quiet all day, the muchach shehu writes to b'kiyum mishal neder, there it's clear that he wants the neder because it's the end of the day and he hasn't been made for it. The golui loni kavanosai. It's clear to us. It's revealed to us what the intent of this person is. Mishum hachi avakiyum. That's why the Torah says it's a kiyum. But you want to stretch it. But if you just made a kiyum in your heart during the day, nobody knows what you're thinking in your heart. That should be like every other. So I believe the Rebbe Kiva is asking a big discussion. This is a case of Dvarim Shabbalah. How could you bring a raya from a case which is not Dvarim Shabbalah? Because you not saying anything for a day, that's a clear expression that you want this neder to someone who expresses it after 10 minutes. Nobody knows, nobody sees. That should have a problem with Dvarim Shabbalah. Because there's an avera of having, it's an avera. There's not some averas aren't averas that you do with your hand. There are averas that merely thinking something is an avera. If you think that you want to do avodah zarah, or if you're loyal, that's an avera. If you thinking to want to do avera, so it's only not good if it contradicts what you're doing. But if you're thinking that you want to do an avera, that's an avera in and of itself. The ones talking about creating a chalosa transaction, it doesn't create a transaction, but that doesn't mean you didn't think that way. It doesn't mean that you had an improper thought. An improper thought is an avera. Can it do a chalois? Can it create a kinyan? No, it cannot. But it doesn't mean your machshav is nothing. Your machshav is a very powerful thing.
I understand it's just the act that's the avera. The thinking about it, I don't remember the source, but that's a difference between a goy and a yid, that he's punished for the machshava, and a yid is.
That's the intent to do an avera. An intent to do an avera is not machshava k'maisa, but there are some maises that the avera is itself thinking, like thinking loyalty to avodah zarah. That's in and of itself an avera. You might not be chayiv misa for it, but when the machshava itself is a avera, I don't know if you need machshava k'maisa. If you need a maisa, then without machshava k'maisa, you don't have a maisa. Or if you need a transaction completed, you haven't completed your transaction. But sometimes a bad thought is in and of itself an avera. You're not thinking to do an avera. Your thought is an avera itself.
I understand. In the time of when avodah zarah was a taiva, right? So it was almost natural to have that thoughts of avodah zarah.
Well, that's why there's no einish for it. I can't say that's why. I'm not touching time.
Means an avera with no einish.
We can't give an einish. I don't know how it works b'dei shemayim, but there's definitely no einish b'dei adam.
Yeah. Okay.
Nowadays, the thought police will get you. You'll get thrown out of Twitter. But in the normal world, thoughts cannot be policed. Okay, so let's see the Gemara weiter. So we're in the middle of analyzing Reb Chanina. Reb Chanina said that if you're shoisik, even though the Torah says shoisik till the end of the day constitutes a hakama, if your mind is just to scare her, but of course you have every intention of making a farah, your time limit is unlimited. Masav Rav Kahana. It says Hachrish Yachrish Law Isha. And we learned, the Brisa tells us, we learn from there, Beshoisik Almanas Lameket Hakasav Medaber. It's speaking about Shoisik Almanas Lameket. It says, the Torah says, if you're merely silent, that will be a kiyum, indicating even if you're silent, with the intent to be made for. Maybe the pasuk is only referring to a case where someone is shoisik with the intent of being mekayim. It says in the pasuk actually 3 times. It uses the word of hechrish. Let me see if I can find the pasuk for him. Hachrish yachrish lo isha. So that's a double lashon. Yom el yom. The hekem is called Dara. And then it says ki hechrish lo b'yom shamay. So the Brisa tells us that it says it twice. Oy ein lo b'shoyzik al manas l'kayim ki shoyim ki hechrish lo harei b'shoyzik al manas l'kayim hakosem medaber. The pasuk was already talking about shoyzik al manas l'kayim. Hamani mekayim and hachrish yachrish lo isha. What's the extra hachrish? It's b'shoyzik al manas l'meket hakosem medaber. So the Gemara tiyofta. So this slugs up Reb Chanina because you see even shoyzik al manas l'meket is still going to be a kiyum. For Gemara, what's the raya? The loikim hab'shoyzik al manas l'kayim hab'shoyzik stam like we had before. There's a middle level. So Gemara, you're right, but we have three hachrishes here. Kra yiseriksid. We have an extra hachrish. So since it's three times, one is the smallest chiddush that it's referring to if he had kavanah to be mekayim. The second one is a bigger chiddush, even if he had no kavanah at all. And the third one is even if he had kavanah to be mefer, the silence will create a kiyum. So this slugs up Rab Chanina. So Rab Chanina is also slugging, and the Gemara is going to slug him up again. Masav Rabba, and the Ran says, why are we asking another kasha even though we slugged him up? Just in case you'll find some teretz to the first kasha. For good measure, we're going to provide another kasha. Masav Rabba, Nadra im chashecha, our very Mishnah. She made another shalashudas time. Meferla at shaloi chashva. He could be made for it for her until nighttime. Why? Why could you be made for up until the night and not past the night? The Mishnah tells us very clearly that if you weren't made for by nighttime, you've ran out of time. What do you mean you ran out of time? If I made another so close to Shkia that there was no time to make hafara, why does my time run out? My das is clearly to be made for, so I should be made for later as well. So from our Mishnah as well, you have a raya that if you run out the clock, even though your intention is to be made for, it doesn't matter. If you ran out the clock, it's automatically a hakama. Master Rabashi, for good measure, we're asking a third question. A husband said, I know that my wife made the door. But I never knew that you could be made for it. So it's 5 days after she made another. And he says, I never knew the halacha that I could be made for. I never knew that. So the question is, did his time expire? The halacha is yafer. Everybody agrees his time didn't expire because his silence is not on the comma because he never knew that he could be made for. What if the yodei ani sheish mafirin? What if he says, I know that I'm allowed to be made for? I always knew that. But what I didn't know, she said neder. She said neder. I didn't know that this was the type of neder that I'm able to be made for. So I knew about the neder. I knew I could be made for, but I didn't know that this was the type of neder that I could be made for. Reb Meir says he cannot be made for. Now, whatever the machlokes is not relevant. But at the end of the day, it's considered a shmiyah. But if my das was I never wanted that neder, so why would anybody hold that I cannot be made for? So in fact, we have three rayas to prove Rav Chanina wrong, even if you have full intention of being made for, but for some reason you haven't. The halacha is if your time expires, it's a kiyum, and you can no longer be made for. So Baruch Hashem, we finished the 10th parak. Today there hadrin aloch nair murasa, hadrin aloch nair murasa, hadrin aloch nair murasa. Zok the heilige Mishnah weiter. Velu nedarim shu made for. What type of nedarim can a husband be made for? The pasuk says explicitly that the husband could be made for nedarim of inui nefesh. Then we learn from a limud that he could also be made for nedarim shebeinoy lebeinoy. The pasuk is called neder v'choshvus iser la'anois nefesh isha yikimenu v'isha yiferenu. That's what it says. That's what it says mefurish in the pasuk, and we have a limud to include as well nedarim shebeinoy lebeinoy, and this sugi is going to discuss which nedarim fall into which of these categories. I'm sorry? Of herself. Yeah, of herself. The question is about a father. So the Rambam holds a father is unrestricted. He could be made for any nether. There are those Rishonim who hold he could only be made for also Nedarim Shebeinoy Lebeino and Inu Nefesh. And there's actually a shaila, even if you hold that a father can be made for everything, what about when she's an Arusa? When she's an Arusa, would that limit the father to Nedarim that the husband could be made? So let's see what the Mishnah says. For instance, if I shower, if I don't shower. So showering is going to be, bathing is going to be one of the subjects of a machlokes as to whether or not it's called inu nefesh or imeskashet v'moyeskashet. If I'm going to put on makeup or not. We're going to learn some interesting things in the next couple of days about showering habits. Rabbi Yosy is arguing on the Tanakama, and he says showering is not inu nefesh. Ein elu nidra inu nefesh. Showering is not inu nefesh, or kishut. The elu hein nidra inu nefesh. What are inu nefesh? Now the Gemara is going to explain this. Around speaks out. Although they're not inu nefesh, they are dvarim shebeinai lebeina, as Dovi spoke out. Her not bathing is definitely dvarim shebeinai lebeina. What are example of inu nefesh? She said, "Kainim peiros ha'olam alai." I'm not going to eat any pears. That's inu nefesh. She can't survive without ever eating pears. Hareza yochal lahafer. That's a neder that he can be made for out inu nefesh. But avada, the other nedarim, the earlier nedarim, Rabbi Yosy agreed you could be made for, but that's out the dvarim shebeinai lebeina. What if she said, "I'm only answering upon myself peiros medina zu alai"? Then it's not a problem. Then yavi lo medina acheres. That you could survive with. You bring it there from a different country. Now, the Ran speaks out, and we'll know this in just a moment, that when she said Paris, Medina Zu Alai, the Medina Zu that she was referring to was not the Medina that she lived in. If it's the Medina that she lived in, he could be made for. But let's just say, I won't eat Paris from Spain. Big deal. Let her buy Paris from Portugal, right? But if she said Paris Chenveni Ze Alai, what if she says, this Chenveni, I'm not going to buy from him? Then Einu Yachal Hafer, because she could buy from anybody else. But the what if her husband didn't have credit anywhere, only by one chemini? So by her saying, I'm not going to buy from this chemini, I'm not going to have pears from this chemini, she's basically going to starve herself because she's not going to get pears anywhere else. So then I raise a yofer. So from there, the round deduces that when it said earlier, pears from Medina Zu Alai, if you said pears from Medina Zu Alai, that means there's nobody she can get credit from because she definitely doesn't have credit from somebody in a different country. So that's how the Ram knows that Paris Medina Zu Alai means she's referring to a specific Medina, but not her own Medina, because her own Medina is called inu nefesh, because that's where she would have a credit account. The Divrei Rabbi Yosy, these are the words of Rabbi Yosy, and once again the Ram speaks out. We're going to need to know why the Gemara had to repeat Divrei Rabbi Yosy. We already know that this is Rabbi Yosy talking from the top of the Amud. Zok the Gemara Bater. Nidrei inu nefesh hu de mefer. A husband could be made for nidrei inu nefesh. She'ein ben inu nefesh, ain't a mefer, and if it doesn't have inu nefesh, she cannot be made for it. But Tanya we learned, ben ish le'ishtoi, ben av levitoi. From there we learned, melamed shabal mefer, nidarim, shebeinai lebeina. So it's much for the Mishnah that Rabbi Yosy is saying they're not inu nefesh, and therefore you cannot be made for them. Zok Gemara, that's not what Rabbi Yosy meant. Amri halin v'halin mefer. Of course, you could even be made for the other nidarim, the nidarim of shaloi erchat and shaloi yiskashet. Miu inu nefesh mefer la'olam. If it's a neder of inu nefesh and the husband's made for it, it's mufer forever. Aval ein ban inu nefesh, but nedarim that are not nedarim of inu nefesh, that's kedeisa techusei havafara. As long as she's remained married to him, the neder is mufer. But mechim megarishla, the moment he divorces her, chayil ala nidra, those nedarim would be chal on her back. B'dvarim shebeinai lebeina. She'ein bahen inu nefesh. Avol yesh ban inu nefesh, but if there is inu nefesh, like I won't eat peiros, then lochayil ala nidra, then even after she gets divorced, that nether is gone forever. But things that are only beinai lebeina, he could only be made for the nether temporarily while she's married to him. If he divorces her, then the nether comes back, even if he marries her again. Frag to Gemara, udvarim she'ein bahen inu nefesh ki megarish lachayil, they come back. I'll prove to you that they don't come back. And if he wants to remarry her, the nedarim won't come back. How do I know? But now we learned, if a woman makes a neder, you should be made for her. You know why? Why should you be made for her? Is because Shema Yigarshena, he might divorce her, and then he won't be able to take her back. So you see clearly you see clearly that his afar today will enable him to take her back. So it must be that his afar today will survive their marriage and will even allow him to marry her again. You see that if he was made for her nether, even if he divorces her, the nether still does not take effect, and he can marry her back. So once again, what is the distinction that Rabbi Yosy was saying in our Mishnah, that these are not nidra inu nefesh, they're only b'nei levinah? What's the difference? Army Dr. Gemara will abort what we said before. Of course, your afara works forever, but halin v'halin have afara. They're both afara forever. Ela nidra inu nefesh mefer bein la'atzmai bein la'acher. The nidra inu nefesh is mufer permanently for everybody. But if it's ein ba inu nefesh, then la'atzmai mefer la'acher meina mefer. As long as this woman can still marry you, meaning even though you divorced her, but you could still marry her again, your hafara remains in place, and her nether is not kal, because she's still available to you, even though you divorced her. And this is what the brisa means. I should add, but if she marries somebody else, and now it's usher for her to marry you back, once she marries somebody else, once she's in a position where she can no longer marry you again, then her nether comes back in full force. So anything related to you, the nether is gone. But the moment she can no longer marry you, at that point her nether would be chal. And this is how you would read our Mishnah. Elu devarim, elu nedarim, shehu mefer bein la'atzmai ubein la'acherim, are nedarim sheish ben inu nefesh. But the nedarim that only b'nei levinah, he could only be made for it for himself, but it will not work for somebody else. Okay, let's stop here because this gets into a whole new sugya, and we have 2 minutes. I just want to talk a little bit about the Rambam. Today is the yahrzeit of the Rambam, of Moshe ben Maimon, and many people said about him, Moshe ad Moshe lekam kamoshe. Besides the fact that he wrote Kol HaTorah, the Rambam encompasses all the Torah. And barrel wine, I once heard him say, is that the Rebbeinu Shem loves irony. And the Rambam is irony of all ironies, because when the Rambam wrote a sefer, he felt that it was so comprehensive and includes every part of the Torah. That's why the Lubavitch would like to learn it. That after my sefer, Dr. Rambam, nobody will ever need any other sefer again, because everything you need to know about the Torah is in my sefer. The irony of that is there's no sefer in the world that prompted the writing of more shmorim than the Rambam himself. There's over 300 Mefarshei Rambam. That's the irony of the Rebbeinu Shalom. But the Rambam was also a big pikech, and he was a doctor in the court of the Grand Vizier of the king of Egypt. He lived in Egypt. He grew up in Spain, but by 13, they were thrown out of Spain, and they had to wander like nomads. They moved through northern Africa until they got to Egypt, and that's where the Rambam lived in his formidable years. And the Rambam, there's 2 fascinating stories. There's one story is the Rambam had a little bit of a controversial persona, and there were gedolim in Europe that were concerned that maybe they have to put him in cher, maybe there's a problem with him. When they read his Moreh Nevuchim, they were afraid. So they sent a delegate, or a mayor, to come in and visit the Rambam and get a handle on who this fellow was, to make sure that they don't need to put him to cher. So what happened was the mayor traveled with a group of people. And when he got to the outskirts of the city, they relaxed by a river, and the mayor, of course, was learning a sefer. And when he packed up to go to actually take audience with the Rambam, he forgot a sefer there. So he knocks on the door, and they wouldn't let him in. And he knocks on the door again. He says, "Tell the Rambam's eating breakfast." So he said, "Okay, tell the Rambam he should enjoy his eggs," and he listed off exactly what the Rambam was eating. So when the shliach went to tell the Rambam back, the Rambam told the shliach, "Bring him in." So the shliach said, the Rambam said you should come in, but by the way, you forgot your sefer at the river. So he comes in, and the Rambam is very nice to him. He sits him down. "Let me serve you something to eat." So the Rambam puts out a plate of a human hand, a cooked, prepared human hand. The guy's a cannibal. So Meir says, "I'd love to have it. I have a little bit upset stomach. I'm okay. It's all right." So he says, he tells his guy, Petrus, go downstairs, bring the gentleman some wine. A guy's going to bring wine. It's Mama Shia Chayanesa. So he says, "I'm not really thirsty. I'm okay." So Rambam says, "You're tired. How would you go to sleep? We'll eat in the morning." Petrus, first thing in the morning, chop off the head of that calf we have. Chop off the head. We're going to serve him a delicious beef back breakfast. So this guy's thinking, "Got a punch. What am I going to do?" Right? So the next morning, he's getting ready, and he says, "I don't really have an appetite. I have an appetite stomach." So the Rambam says, "Cut the baloney. I know you're here to see who I am. So let me tell you what you need to know of how to don the kafschus." He says, that hand was not a human hand. I know you thought it was a human hand. That hand is actually a plant that's available in this neighborhood that looks like a human hand. You don't know it, but it's a very healthy plant. And of course, it's no problem. I'm not a cannibal. Petrus is a Jewish, he's an Erlich, and he showed him that there's a Masechta somewhere where there's somebody ben Petrus, I forgot the Gadol's name, mentioned in the Gemara, and he was the father of Rabbi Shua ben Levi. He's a father-in-law of Rabbi Shua ben Levi. So it's a Jewish name. So once again, this guy felt like an idiot because he was choshed in B'Sherim. And about the calf, don't you know that a ben Pekua doesn't need shchita? If you shech the mother and there's a live animal inside it, that live animal becomes mutter with the shchita of its mother. So it doesn't need shchita. So Rameir started to cry, and he realized that the Rambam was a choshev Eid, and he went back and he reported that we're talking about a choshev Eid. The other story is hard to believe the story, but this is the story. When the Rambam became the doctor for the Sultan, he displaced some Muslim doctor who was very, very angry, and he decided that he needs to undo him once and for all. And there's two famous stories about it, about the different things that happened. So one day, the Goyish doctor comes to the king and says, "You know, my mom is just trying to kill you." "How do I know he's trying to kill you?" So he says, "I'll tell you how I know. Because there's some medical rule that I'm not aware of, that if you're poisoned, the only thing that could save you is if you drink a stronger poison than the poison that poisoned you, and that will neutralize the original poison." This is how the story goes. I don't understand the details, but this is how the story goes. So the Rambam has this special antidote that he keeps. In the event you get poisoned, he's going to give you that poison. But I'm telling you, it's not the strongest, and you could die because you're very, very much exposed. So the king says, "Okay, it's hard to believe, my loyal Rambam, how could that be?" So he says, "We'll do a test." "Why don't you do a test?" The king says, "Well, very good, this is the test we're going to do. I'm going to call you both to bring the strongest poison, and each one is going to drink the other's poison and then their own poison. If their poison is the strongest, they'll be fine. But if their poison is in fact not the strongest, then they're going to die." So the king says, "I like that. It's like Russian roulette. I like that because I'm convinced that I have the strongest poison. So therefore, I'm not worried." So he called the Rambam and he told the Rambam, "I had a dream." He didn't tell him the Muslim snitched on him. "I had a dream that someone wants to kill me, one of my doctors, and I don't know who it is. This is the test I'm going to do." So the Rambam says, "But I don't want to kill him. I don't want to kill the other doctor." So he says, "Well, he says the same thing. So do it." So the Rambam says, "Okay." And as the Rambam is leaving, he sees that this Muslim guy, instead of tzitterin, which he should be, because he's going to die tomorrow, he's like, he has a snide smirk on his face. "Kill, I got you." So the Rambam, he needed a cheshbon, what's going on over here? So the Rambam thinking, in the middle of the night, he chapped, "Oh, I got it." The next day, he prepares to come to the king. He takes a water with some sugar in it, and he colors it with red wine, and he brings a vial of harmless, watered down wine with sugar in it. And the cup, and the first thing that happens is the king says, "Okay." The other doctor brings his poison, and they put each one into two glasses, so they each have a glass of theirs and a glass of the others. And the priest says, the Muslim guy says, "Okay, I'll go first." So he drinks the Rambam's poison, okay, and then he drinks his poison. Looks good, and he's standing. So the Rambam then drinks the goy's poison, and he drinks his poison, and he's fine. And then after a minute, the goy starts to turn green and red, and the goy collapses and dies. So the king said, "Oh, I'm so happy." First of all, the guy was a bastard anyway. I don't care that he dropped dead. He's not behind the guy. But at the end of the day, what's going on over here? You have the strongest poison. So the Ram says, "King, I want you to taste my poison." So what? You're going to kill me? He says, "Trust me, this is simple wine and water." And the king drinks it and says, "Yeah, it's a regular wine and water." So what's going on over here? What's going on? So the Ram says, "It's very, very simple." I was thinking to myself, what is his plan? What is his plan? So I figured what his plan must have been is that he'll drink a weaker poison, like a time delay poison, a time release poison he'll drink before he comes, okay? And then when he comes here, he won't want to drink his own poison because then that's going to re-poison him. So he'll put water into his poison, and then he'll get my poison. And when he drinks my poison, he'll drink, when he drinks my poison will save him from his poison. But to you, it'll look like my poison was the weaker poison. But in reality, he was relying on my poison to save his life, right? And so he drank my poison, and then he drank his water. That's what he would think he was going to do. In the meantime, he drank my water, and he drank his water, and you just saw the effects of his original poison that he drank at home kill him. Me, on the other hand, is I knew he was going to bring water, because that was his whole cheshbon. So I drank his water, and then I drank my water, and I'm feeling perfectly fine. So the king said, "I see you're not only a good doctor, you're also a smart guy." That was the one story. And the other story is also similar, that they were each going to prepare a poison for the other one to drink. Let me think. They're each going to prepare one to drink, and each one would bring an anecdote, so that they could prove that I'll drink any poison you want to give me, you give me, but I have a anecdote, so I'll drink it. So Kachava, the Rambam drank the other guy's poison, and it impacted him. He quickly drank his antidote, and he got better. Then when it came to the Rambam serving up his poison, he said, "You know what? Before we make the priest drink it, I don't want to kill the priest. Bring out a prisoner who's condemned to death. Bring out such a prisoner." So they bring out the prisoner, and they give him to drink this, and they open it up, and just the smell of it. The Rambam says, "You know what? Before we even open it up in the room, everyone has to wear a mask because just the fumes are so powerful." And they pulled it up, and this guy on death row is freaking out. He knows he's about to get killed. They force him to drink it. He convulses and he dies. So they gave him maybe the other guy's antidote. It didn't work. The Rambam's poison killed him. So the king says, "Wow, unbelievable what you did." So the Rambam says, "King, I want you to have some of this poison." He said, "We want to kill me?" He said, "No, this is regular bronfin. This is nothing more than vodka." So he asked Rambam, "If it's vodka, how come the prisoner died?" Because the prisoner died from his imagination. When he's sure he's drinking poison, that freaked him out. He had a heart attack from that. But really, it was regular vodka. I'm not looking to kill anybody. So those are the two stories of the Rambam. Schusei, Yogan Aleinu, I'll call you throw. That's like a complicated cheshbon over there with the Rambam. With the poison, your poison, my poison.